I can see what other agencies, successful agencies, are doing that's kind of pushing them to that next level of being efficient and effective here.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm excited today to be joined by our good friend, Carson Pierce. Carson, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Not a rookie anymore.
Not a rookie. Your second episode, for those of you that are not familiar with Carson, Carson is one of the lead consultants here at Parakeeto. So he's the one who actually does a lot of the work with our clients to help them, set up and run and interpret and act on their data operations inside of their agency. So yeah, there it is. Carson, anything you want to add?
I don't know. It's getting towards the end of the year when we're recording this, which is always an exciting time for the consulting side of things because all those agencies out there are thinking about the year that's just gone by and what's coming up ahead. So it's a really fun time to be talking to agencies and getting to hear how people are thinking right now.
Well, that kind of frames up our topic for today, which is somewhat of a looking back on this year, but a lot of kind of looking forward at what we think the agency environment is going to be looking like into 2025 and beyond. And for context for everybody listening, Carson, you are kind of our resident industry stats nerd. You're always posting industry reports in our Slack channel. It seems like you're subscribed to just about every agency report source that there is out there, and you just love digging through that data and getting an understanding of, what's going on. And it's something that you kind of started doing for us too, like looking across all of our different clients and figuring out what tools they're using and, what their different stats look like compared to each other. So I was really excited when you recommended that we do this topic. So with that, I want to turn it over to you. What do you see happening in the industry and what do you think is important for us to talk about today?
Yeah. Every time, especially when I'm working with new agencies, they always want to know, like, how do we compare to everything else out there? So that's why I like getting into that data and being able to provide that. What we were seeing in our own set of agencies that we work with, especially in the last 3 to 6 months, is just a real tightening up of finance. Things were getting really tight on the financial side. Cash flow was a problem. Cash reserves were a problem. We had agencies that were just hitting the end of the line going, we have to make some serious decisions right now because things are so bad. And it really got me thinking about how we've been projecting all of 2024. So at the end of 2023, you read all the surveys and you check out all the information and everyone's like, yeah, 2023 sucked, but things look way better in 2024. It's going to be great. And then we get into 2024 and, it was maybe a little bit better, but it still just wasn't happening. And you get halfway through 2024 and you check around on the sentiment of things and it still wasn't better, but there was still optimism. And we know that agency owners, as a rule, are optimists. They kind of have to be to do this job. But there became a point of saying, are we just constantly hoping that things will get better next year, next quarter, whatever? And David C. Baker put out a post on LinkedIn not that long ago where he said he doesn't think there is that we're going to recover into something better. He was saying this is just the new normal now. There was a period in COVID where things were really bad. There was a period during COVID that things were really good. And we thought, those are just bumps. But what we've experienced over the last year or so may just be the new normal. And so the thing that I want to really turn our eye on for 2025 is to say, what if things don't get better? What if, the election is over in the United States and things are just the same as they were in the last couple of years? All the things we keep hoping for, we can't wait for that. So if this is the new normal, if things are just harder, how do we survive in this environment? Um, and that's where I think you and I especially, get really excited about things, because that's where we work. We work to figure out, how do we operate agencies in a way that's going to be profitable, that doesn't depend on what's going on out in the world or how the market's going to shift or whatever. We want you to figure out how to operate really effectively, so that those things, you don't have to be optimistic all the time. So that's my premise going into 2025. I'm of course going to check out all the other surveys and stuff to see what's going on, but I wanted to use that as a baseline, and I think it's a safe baseline, because if it turns out that things do get better, great, we're rolling in it. But if things don't get better, we're prepared for that and we're ready for it. So I want to check with you to figure out what you're seeing, because you talk to a lot of agencies too, what you're seeing in terms of, what do we do about that? Because there's lots of levers we can pull, and there's lots of things we can do. What are we seeing that the successful agencies are doing, that we can maybe expand to the other people listening?
Well, I am inclined to agree with your assessment. And to your point, it's interesting because we are both talking to agencies very frequently, but it's a bit of a different perspective. You're mostly speaking to them one on one in this very kind of deep context, looking at their numbers because you're really doing a lot of the client work. And I'm usually doing it at this kind of higher level. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm having lots of conversations there. I'm doing, of course, a lot of conversations with potential new clients, hearing what their challenges are on the surface. And then I'm doing a lot of speaking. And, speaking of David, I was just at MYOB speaking at that event, which he put on, which was awesome, and got to speak with a lot of people there. And I'm completely aligned to this thesis that this is how it's going to be. And in fact, I'll go as far as to say it's only going to get worse. And I see this not as a macroeconomic situation. I see this as just a normal maturing of a market. This is just something that happens in every market, where over time margins get worse, and margins get worse because there's more competition that enters, and therefore the level of sophistication that you need to have in order to be profitable goes up. And just look at every other industry, look at airlines, look at grocery, look at, these are extremely low margin businesses. And the level of sophistication that it takes to just survive in those industries is so high. And I think that this is just a step in that direction for this market that's been around for a long time, which is agencies, but it's been accelerated because of things like COVID, right? So, what happened during COVID? Well, the cost of onshore labor went way up. Globalization of competition was accelerated dramatically because all of a sudden everyone was working remote. People were working with agencies that were onshore, but they were working with them remotely. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, why am I not working with an agency out of Eastern Europe that does really great quality design and development work, but at a fraction of the cost? And now all of a sudden, if you run an agency in North America, the level of competition is significantly different than it was even 5 or 6 years ago. AI is on the come up. There's this freelancer economy that's absolutely booming. Then that also accelerated during COVID, when a lot of people, kind of had a come to Jesus moment and decided maybe they didn't want to work for the man anymore. Maybe they want to freelance. And so, there's been a lot of things that I think COVID in particular has really accelerated. And then AI is kind of the 1-2 punch. And I don't think that that is the cause. I think it's just an accelerant on the natural tendency that a market has. And so the key for me is, okay, can you be a successful agency owner in 2025 and beyond without actually understanding your business model and how it works and all the different options that you have to increase your profitability, even if you can't charge more money, which was the one drum that we've been banging for the last 10 years, is specialize so that you can charge more money. It's okay, everybody's doing that now. It's not really an option. So what else is there? There has to be another answer, but what are those answers? And I think that's the important thing for us to talk about today.
Yeah, there's something really interesting in all that. It used to be, and I speak from experience because I did start my own agency at one point, but it used to be, you could just be good at programming or design or whatever and start up an agency and off you go and you're making money. And you're right. I think with the way that the market has matured, We're now at a point where that's not good enough. I mean, you want that, but you also need to know how to run a business and run it well and efficiently. If you're missing that component of it, I think you're gonna get shut out here. So yeah, let's dig into this. Um, there are a few different ways. You touched on a few of them already that we can adapt and get better. And the ones that I'm kind of thinking of off the top of my head, because we talk about it all the time, your cost per hour, so your cost of your team delivering the work primarily, is a big one. Utilization is another one. An average billable rate, how much you actually get to charge or how much you're actually making on your time. Those are the three areas that I know we focus a lot on. And I know when I think about those three things, I can see what other agencies, successful agencies, are doing that's kind of pushing them to that next level of being efficient and effective here. So let's talk about those. What are you seeing? And we can go through them in order. But what are you seeing in cost per hour? Like cost of your team. What are the good ones out there doing right now?
Yeah. So I'll take a quick step back and then a step back in. So the reason that these three levers are important is because they control delivery margin, right? Which we understand is the fundamental basis for profitability in a service-based business. You could, if you have a financial background, you could think of it as gross margin. But basically, the question that that's asking is, if a client gives us $1, how much do we have to spend to then earn that dollar? And the more money we have left over from that dollar, the more money we have for overhead and profit. So if we have healthy delivery margin, we probably are going to have a healthy business, or at least we'll have the choice to do that. And the three numbers we just talked about, average cost per hour, average billable rate, and utilization, are the things that control delivery margin. So with that said, average cost per hour, if we think functionally about how that metric works, there's basically two ways to improve it. Number one is you get more capacity out of a person for what you're paying them. And this was a very popular strategy in the consulting and agency world 20 years ago. Hire somebody for 40 grand a year, get them to work 100 hours a week. Awesome. We've just cut their cost per hour in half, basically, relative to what it should have been based on the employment contract. That is increasingly difficult to do. And I would say that's probably a positive thing that that's not like something that is really rampant in the industry anymore, because it gave us a bad rap and it's pretty unsustainable. So the other side of that coin is like you just have to find less expensive people to do the work. So what are we seeing on that front? Well, offshoring is obviously a really big one. And so we're offshoring or nearshoring. So we're seeing people look at other geographies like South America, the Philippines, India, Eastern Europe, and that has like really exploded in the last few years. And more of the firms that we're working with are evaluating getting really high quality talent in those kinds of areas to try and get their cost per hour down to make it more competitive, so that they don't have to charge, very, very high rates in order to have the margins that they need to run the business. And of course, the other way to get there is, if you're going to stay onshore, trying to get more junior people to do a larger share of the work, which tends to really come with all the levers we use to decrease the level of judgment required to get something done. So that's clear processes, clear templatization, technology leverage. It could just be like getting really, really good at training and developing talent internally as an organization. Like that is a real competitive advantage if you can be a talent producer rather than a talent consumer, because being a consumer of talent is very expensive. So those are some of the things that I've been seeing. I'm curious, anything that you're seeing that I missed there, Carson?
No, I think you touched on the big ones, especially offshoring. The the agencies that I'm working with that I think have really capitalized on this are the ones that they've got sort of a core team onshore, so strategy, account management, those kinds of roles, and then the other stuff, especially development. We see lots of teams based in like India or the Philippines, and when you can take advantage of that, where you're paying very, pretty low salaries to this offshore team, which are competitive for them, but seem really low relative to what we pay here, but charge the same amount for that work, then yeah, you can get a huge benefit from that. So I've seen that with several of the agencies we work with, more so than we've ever had in the past, I think.
I'm going to plant a little seed here. But towards the end of the episode, remind me to come back to internal specialization, because I think that's, I'm going to leave that one till the end. So everybody, you have to keep listening if you want to hear that nugget. But that is what I think is like it's part of what you're talking about, but it's like an extension on that idea that I think is a big part of the future of how the agency industry is going to evolve. So, you know, teaser alert here. We're going to talk about that at the end. But anyway, back to you, Carson.
All right. So that's the cost per hour side of things. Let's shift over to, let's go to average billable rate. So how much are we actually making? And you kind of alluded to this already, that there was a period of time recently where we went through a lot of inflation, higher salaries, and most agencies bumped up their pricing to match to that. But the thing is, and price increases are like the easiest way to bump up your average billable rate. You know, charge more, you've got a higher ABR. But it's not sustainable for a long period of time. There's only so much you can raise your rates before, and we've seen it so many times, before you hit that wall of, hey, customers are not willing to pay that anymore. So I think we've kind of hit that point where price increases are no longer easy option. So I'm curious what you're seeing as the next step. Where do we find those ways to increase our ABR that don't involve price increases?
It's an excellent question, and I'm glad that you're asking it. You're much more eloquent about this than I am, but I'll just go out and say that like I get really, really pissed off at how many experts, air quotes, are out there in the industry, and they're a one trick pony. The only thing that they have to say to agencies is you need to charge more, and it's like, okay, dude, I get it, but there are limits to that, to your point. And especially in 24, we started to see this, like, and it's going the other way. We're seeing agencies get fired for lower cost options because that's what businesses are doing. They're looking for cost cutting opportunities because their margins are getting squeezed just like ours are. So there's another side to that coin. So if we think about average billable rate functionally, how does that metric work? The formula is agency gross income divided by delivery hours. So two ways to improve it. Number one, charge more money, increase your agency gross income. Assuming that's not an option, the other side that is not really, people don't pay as much attention to it, but it's just as effective, is spend half as much time, or spend less time, I should say, doing the thing without a relative decrease in the AGI that you earn. So a simple example of this, if you spend half as much time getting something done and you charge the same amount as you used to for it, you made twice as much money for every hour that your team spent. Therefore, your business could earn twice as much revenue with the same team. Therefore, assuming all things are being equal, you would double the profitability of that business. You would more than double the profitability of that business, actually, because your overhead would likely not increase in a relative fashion. So that's really powerful. Efficiency is the other side of that coin. And a lot of the ways in which you're going to decrease your average cost per hour are also the same ways that you're going to decrease your average billable rate. So it comes back to templatization, clear scopes of work, technology leverage, good systems, all of those kinds of things. And it's a super, super powerful lever. And the other thing that I'll say on this is paying attention to quality of earnings is important here too, where we see this all the time with clients where they're just looking at the volume of revenue that's coming in. And what we double click on and discover is like, hey, there are certain types of work that have way higher average billable rates. And it's like, over time, can we shift more and more of the revenue that comes into the business to these things that are just more profitable? And that can be another powerful lens to look at this through as well. Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. With that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it.
Yeah, for sure. I remember, I don't know what it was. It was like Starbucks or something, and they announced they were closing all these Starbucks shops. And people were like, what are you talking about? Starbucks makes so much money. But that's because they're looking at which ones are profitable and which ones aren't. And we need to do that same sort of exercise with our clients because, oh man, I see it all the time. Like, and it's usually a big client. Like, this client is 20% of our total business, but we actually lose money working with them. Like, okay, we need to stop doing that and shift our attention to something else. On the efficiency side, I think, Yeah. Another fun uh, pitfall I've seen is where agencies will spend all kinds of time building out templates and systems and processes and all that. They'll put literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of effort into building this out. And when they come out on the other side, they're the use of it is to decrease their price to clients because now they can do it faster. It's like there's zero ROI on that if all you're doing is passing all the savings on to the client. So being able to like actually understand that you are now offering a higher value service because you have these systems in place and still charging for that. Like the client, if you can do it in half the time, that's still a benefit to the client too. You shouldn't be charging half as much. So that was a big one, and I see it a lot. The other thing I want to check on with you is AI, because it's a relatively new thing in the grand scheme of things. And the agencies, I think, that are utilizing it effectively and finding ways to be able to still produce results, but do it in less time, I think are the ones that are capitalizing on this. Are you seeing the same thing on your side?
Yeah, I mean, we're still, I think, so early in AI that like the amount of leverage that it's creating is still, somewhat limited. But we've definitely seen some examples of, especially for stuff like, in the pitch process, coming up with concepts, coming up with stock imagery, coming up with copy, writing drafts of things, or a lot of the kind of mechanical tasks of account and client management, like taking notes from a client conversation and turning that into follow-up calls. Like there are a lot of these like little things that if you stack them up can lead to a ton of efficiency actually. And it's exciting because I think there's a lot more coming down the pipe, and the agencies that actually have some technical expertise and can place some really good rails around these things, they're able to find some wedges. Now the question of course is, how long is that going to be like a massive competitive advantage? But it, even if that's short lived, if there's a significant increase in margin there, fill your coffers because you're probably going to need a pretty solid cash reserve when AI starts actually like replacing entire functions within an organization.
Yeah, I mean, and even if it is a short-lived thing in terms of bringing in additional profit, I think at some point it becomes table stakes. Like if you're not there, you're falling behind. Cool. All right. Last thing, last lever that we're going to talk about, utilization. What are you seeing the successful agencies do in terms of utilization?
Well, I'll tell you what they're not doing is using utilization as a whip and holding their entire team accountable to utilization targets because we've seen this time and time again, and I'm sure there's some people that like got hives the moment that we said the word utilization listening to this. It's a dangerous metric. It's easy to use in the wrong way, and in our experience, when you just start like holding ICs accountable to a utilization target, they just do the opposite of what we want them to do, which is, oh, you need me to arbitrarily hit this target. Let me go spend twice as much time on things than I need to, so that I can hit that utilization target. But we just talked about how average billable rate is calculated. We're just going to see a decrease in that, and our profitability is not going to improve. So I think the way that people are really using utilization is a couple of things. Number one, understand what the model of the agency is. This is, I think, something that gets overlooked constantly. We see it all the time. A client comes in and they're like, oh, our utilization target is X. And then we go look at the model of their agency and we're like, well, that's impossible unless you ask people to work a ton of overtime. So let's reconcile that. Like the ceiling for your business is 56%. You can't have a 75% target. Or we need to have a serious conversation about how might you restructure your team so that that becomes feasible. And in a lot of cases, it's not actually that necessary. They're trying to do what agencies did 20 years ago, which is crank up utilization as a way to compensate for the fact that they're not actually healthy on those other two metrics. So, step one, understand what your actual model utilization is. Step two, forecast so that you're not surprised if you are above or below your utilization, because ultimately, utilization is a management metric and it comes down to your ability to make sure you have the right amount of capacity relative to the amount of work that's coming in and balance those two things. And those are decisions that are largely outside of the hands of your team. If there wasn't enough work for them to hit their utilization target, then they're not going to hit it. It's up to you to make sure that those things are balanced. And so I think understanding the model and what the target should be, and then being really, really deliberate about forecasting so that you can make the right decisions about where to focus on sales, when to start things, when it might be time to bring someone on or let someone go, and be really deliberate and mindful of those decisions. That's going to be the biggest key. And of course, we want utilization to be as high as it can be, but with a real consideration on the consequences of it being higher than it should be for too long. And there is real collateral damage there. You might be dealing with turnover, you might deal with quality of work issues, and those are more nuanced and opaque things to measure the impact of, but we know from experience that those are real, having lived it.
Yeah, for sure. One thing you mentioned there about the model, I think it's interesting because typically what I see in agencies where they have a model problem is not that they're asking too little of their team. They're still asking for 70 to 80% of their time to be billable. That's pretty standard. The problem is the imbalance between how much of your team is dedicated to delivery versus how much is non-delivery or overhead. And I mean, we just did an audit recently where it's like almost 40% of the team was pure overhead. And right away, you've only got 60% of your team left to do delivery. If they're only working 75% on billable work, then you're cutting it down, and it just became really problematic. And that's where I see the problem. It's not that we're saying, oh, you're not working enough billable hours in a week for your production team. It's just we haven't modeled the whole company to for all that math to work.
It's amazing how often I'm having this conversation, like especially before a client starts to work with us. And then I'm sure you see it all the time whenever you get into the audit, where a client comes in and they're like, oh, we don't have a utilization problem. Our utilization is super high, but we're still not profitable. And then I double click on it and it's like, well, you're taking all of your non-delivery staff out of capacity. You're also taking vacation time and paid time off out of capacity. So they're like, so it's like you look at August and your utilization was through the roof, but everybody was on vacation. It's like, well, that's the opposite of the truth. So like there's a lot of false positives, and it's scary because these agents, that's the case. They actually believe that they don't have a utilization problem because they're measuring it in a way that they're getting a false read on what's going on. And so then they're focused on all these other things that aren't going to move the needle, when like actually their problem really is utilization. It's a flaw in how it's being measured. So plug, you probably already heard the mid-roll by now, but like if you want to understand exactly how to measure all of the metrics that we've talked about today, you can do so at no cost in our agency profitability toolkit. It has videos and it has, spreadsheet templates and all these things to help you kind of get these things dialed. But like these details matter so much when you're looking at something like utilization and trying to manage it. And we talked about both sides of that equation, either setting targets that are too high because you're not modeling it properly, or thinking that it's not the problem when it actually is because you're not measuring it properly. So yeah, I think that's just worth highlighting. It is alarming how many people are not measuring this metric correctly and have a belief that is not congruent with reality because of how that metric is being measured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. The other thing that I see trend wise that will have an impact on utilization is, and you mentioned at the very beginning, that move to more contracted freelance models. Because typically you're paying those people only when they're doing billable work. So their utilization is 100%. The more that becomes part of the balance of your team, the higher your overall utilization gets. So taking advantage of the fact that you're no longer responsible for filling up someone's time, you're only using their time when you need it, can be a big lever there too.
Yeah. It's worth, I think, talking about too that, while we're talking about trends, one of the trends that we certainly saw coming out of COVID and leading up to COVID as well, this has been a kind of a macro trend over time, is that people value work-life balance more than they ever have. We talked about this earlier, like the world of like you work in an agency, you work 80 hours a week, you live on coffee and cigarettes, like that's not really a thing anymore. And in fact, we're seeing way more of our clients talking to us about like, hey, could we do a 4-day work week? Could we do flexible Fridays? Like we're seeing way more of these, part-time employees or people that, like have multiple jobs. And I think it's worth noting that like all of those things are possible, and having a nuanced understanding of your model is the best way to work through that conversation and find a way to do it that's feasible. Because we've also seen this lots of times, right, where a company goes to a 4-day work week and they pay for it with their entire profit margin. because they didn't really do the math to understand like, oh, this is going to cost us 20% of our revenue to take 20% of our capacity off the table. So um, that is like a market difference. And when we think about utilization, the two sides of the coin are capacity and delivery hours. And so you got to understand what the implications are with those two things, and how the model of your internal team really affects that. And to your point, this kind of starts to lead into this conversation about internal specialization, but being able to push some of the risk outside of the business and use freelancers is a really good way to handle some of the uncertainty that exists inherently in some service offerings, or that might exist as you move into this new world where things are changing, and they're changing very quickly.
Yeah. All right. So you touched on the internal specialization thing again. Let's get into that one. Um, and this is something you're seeing more than I'm seeing. But what's your perspective on this?
Yeah. So this is, I'm going to zoom out and get a little bit more theoretical here, but we talked earlier about the maturity of markets. And this is kind of like a law across all markets, is that over time they mature. As they mature, the margins get tighter and tighter as more competition enters the market. And one of the things that you see in these markets very, very commonly is they become increasingly fragmented as the margins come under pressure. So let's look at grocery, for example. Most grocery stores don't handle their own logistics. Most food processors don't handle their own logistics. And if you look at like how, let's say, I don't know, I'll use an example from my own business, a jar of honey. How does that jar of honey actually get to the grocery store? Well, it goes through a lot of steps. The beekeeper is probably selling the honey to a honey packer. That honey packer is probably going to process and bottle that honey. They're going to use a distributor that's going to work with the grocery stores to go and place it in the grocery stores. And there might be, depending on the product line, several other layers in between. So what you've seen there is the supply chain has gotten broken down into increasingly smaller parts, because the people doing that step of the process become increasingly specialized in that step of the process. And through that specialization, they're able to protect the little bit of margin that's left there and build a more viable business. And it makes sense, because if one organization was trying to be good at all of those steps in the process, they're spreading themselves very thin, and it's unlikely that they're going to get very, very optimized about each of those things. I'm starting to see the same thing inside of agencies. And I think we've seen this in our data, where some of the most profitable agencies that we've ever audited have really kind of started mastering this idea. And I think about this, one client in particular that was working in the SEO space, that, they would sell these $10,000 or $20,000 a month retainers to clients. They would basically just do account management and some strategy. I think they had like one floating web dev person in case like a fire started burning at 1 o'clock in the morning. That was very, very timely. And then all of the lower value, high risk stuff, they partnered with other agencies and white labeled that work out to them for things like link building, content writing, technical SEO, all of those things they pushed outside their four walls. So they weren't trying to hold on to the entire pie, but the slice of the pie that they held onto was the highest value work that they were the best at doing. And as a result, they scaled to 8 figures very quickly. They had incredible margins on the work that was left over. Their ABRs were several $100s an hour. And, they were happy running that business because all the things they were doing were in their zone of genius. And I'm seeing a big rise in white label agencies. I'm seeing a big rise in this business model. And I think that over time, you're going to see more and more firms that not only specialize externally, right? That's what we've been talking about for the last decade, is you got to be specialized in terms of who you serve, but now also thinking internally about like, are we a sales and marketing organization? Are we a production organization? Like what are we actually good at as business owners and as operators? And let's like really close in the scope of what we do as a business to those things that we're best at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. As you were talking, I had a couple of our agency clients in my head too, and like, oh yeah, that's exactly what they do. There's huge. I mean, if you look at it from the outside, you're like, oh, they do X. Well, no, what you see as an end product, most of that is happening outside of their walls. But they've got this good account team, production team, whatever, um, doing the specialized work internally. And you're right, the highest ABRs I've seen have been those agencies. So that's really interesting.
Quality of revenue over quantity of revenue. I think that's going to be a big idea going forward.
All right, cool. Well, this has been good. I think, yeah, this is a sort of the high level. I don't even call these trends. It's more just like, if what we're seeing in the industry is a real thing, these are the ways that we need to react to it. Or even if it's not a real thing, if we do these things, we're gonna benefit from it. I do want to come back and chat with you at some point about the more tactical micro trends that we're seeing, and how it maybe impacts some of these bigger ideas. But I think this is good for today.
I think so too. And I like that idea. So seed planted, you got to keep tuning in if you want to hear about the micro trends. And I'm really glad that we're doing these. Like, I had so much fun today. I hope that everyone listening is enjoying this. If you are listening to this and you think that this is good and that we should keep doing like these conversations internally between myself and people on the team, then like, let us know, send us an email, leave us a comment. We always love hearing from you. And Carson, I had a blast. Thank you for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, man, I get so much value from this podcast, I wish there was something I could do to return the favor. Well, today's your lucky day because you can leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and it is incredibly helpful. Of course, if you haven't grabbed a free copy of the Agency Profit Toolkit, go and get that. It's got tons of free resources to help you improve your profitability. If you're looking to get in the fast lane and get help from experts to improve your profitability and measure your most important metrics, then apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. We'd love to chat with you and figure out how we can help. With all of that, thank you so much for being a listener, and we will see you on the next episode.